The most feared Viking king in history had nightmares. These nightmares weren't about ordinary enemies, they were about 3 warriors who could appear from thin air and vanish like mist. These warriors were so powerful that they had refused to fight alongside Ragnar. Runic inscriptions found in Iceland in 2021 confirm this terrifying truth. Even Ragnar Lothbrok could feel fear. When we think of Ragnar Lothbrok, the first thing that comes to mind isn't fear, but courage. This man fought dragons, spoke with gods, and mocked death itself. So what could terrify such a legend? In Viking culture, there were 3 different types of warriors who were even more powerful than Ragnar. These weren't just human, they were half god, half monster beings. But behind Ragnar's fear of these warriors lay a much deeper secret. Because these 3 warriors weren't just powerful, they had the power to change Ragnar's destiny, to humiliate him in the eyes of the gods. And the most terrifying part, these warriors held the key to Ragnar's death. Today, I'm going to tell you this horrifying story. But first, Vikings. If you're curious about the warriors who terrified Ragnar, click that red shield button. Support these terrifying truths with the power of Mjolnir and join our Viking clan. The first group of warriors was the Shadow Tribe. These warriors were so mysterious that most Vikings doubted whether they were even real. But Ragnar knew them, because he had encountered them. The Shadow Tribe came from the northernmost regions of Scandinavia. They used ancient warfare techniques from the Ice Age. They only fought at night and never showed their faces. The Shadow Tribe's combat tactics. The Shadow Tribe's combat tactics were unlike anything normal Viking warriors had ever encountered. Instead of open warfare, they practiced psychological warfare. First, they would circle their enemies for days, making sounds but never appearing. When their enemies became exhausted and paranoid, they would strike. Their most terrifying weapons were arrow tips enhanced with runic spells. These arrows wounded not just the body but the soul, forcing victims to confront their own fears. Ragnar's encounter with the Shadow Tribe. Ragnar's encounter with the Shadow Tribe occurred during the Northumberland raid. That night, Ragnar and his warriors had made camp, exhausted. At midnight, strange sounds began in the camp. First whispers from the distance, then laughter coming from nowhere. Even Ragnar's most experienced warriors began to feel uneasy. Suddenly, an arrow pierced the ground in front of Ragnar's tent. At the arrow's tip was a runic inscription. "You are merely the god's puppet, Ragnar. True power lies with us." That night, the Shadow Tribe attacked Ragnar's camp. But this wasn't a normal attack. They hadn't come to kill Ragnar, but to frighten him. Throughout the attack, the Shadow Tribe never fully appeared. They only manifested as shadows, appearing and disappearing. Ragnar's warriors seemed to be fighting their own shadows. At the most terrifying moment, the Shadow Tribe's leader appeared before Ragnar. His face was completely covered, only his crimson eyes visible. "You fear your death, Ragnar," he had said. "But what you should really fear is the emptiness of your life." After this encounter, Ragnar had changed. He now suffered from insomnia at night. He began seeing enemies in every shadow. The saga records state, from that day forward, Ragnar never travelled alone, because he knew the Shadow Tribe was following him. But the Shadow Tribe wasn't the only force that terrified Ragnar. Even more horrifying warriors were coming. The second group of warriors were the Berserkers known as Fenrir's children. But these weren't the normal Berserkers in Ragnar's army. These were so savage that they were monster humans no commander could control. Fenrir's children believed they were the spiritual offspring of Fenrir the wolf from Norse mythology. Before entering battle, they performed special rituals. In these rituals, they would drink their own blood, wear wolf hides, and literally cease being human. Transformation, ritual, and supernatural powers. The transformation ritual of Fenrir's children was very different from normal berserker rituals. They didn't just become enraged, they transformed into completely different beings. The ritual worked like this. First, they would fast for 3 days. Then they would recite ancient runic spells dedicated to Fenrir the wolf, drawing ancient symbols on their bodies with their own blood. At the ritual's climax, the warriors' eyes would turn completely yellow, body temperature would rise abnormally, and they would gain supernatural strength. This power was so great they could break normal humans' bones with their bare hands. Ragnar's encounter with Fenrir's children. Ragnar had tried to recruit Fenrir's children into his own army. This was his greatest mistake. The encounter occurred during the preparation period before Ragnar's Paris raid. Ragnar needed powerful warriors, and had heard of Fenrir's children's reputation. When Ragnar found them, he tried to negotiate. "Come with me, I'll give you endless victory," he had said. The leader of Fenrir's children, Ulrich Bloodfang, had responded to Ragnar. "You speak of victory, but we find peace only in death. You're not our friend, but our enemy, because you still try to remain human." Ulrich Bloodfang stands in the centre of a forest clearing, his massive frame even more imposing as he begins his demonstration for Ragnar. His yellow eyes gleam with predatory intensity as he calls one of his own men forward, a younger berserker who approaches without fear. Understanding this is part of their savage culture. "This is what we are," Ulrich growls, his voice already changing as the transformation begins. His muscles visibly swell, veins bulging under his skin as supernatural power courses through him. His hands extend into claws, his face becoming more bestial. The air crackles with primal energy. Ragnar watches, hand instinctively moving to his sword hilt, as Ulrich's humanity disappears entirely. What happens next is swift and brutal, a demonstration of raw, uncontrolled power that leaves no doubt about the berserker's words. The forest clearing falls silent except for Ulrich's heavy breathing as he slowly returns to normal, blood on his claws. "You see, Ragnar," Ulrich says, wiping his hands clean, "we cannot be controlled because we lose ourselves completely. We are weapons without masters." Ragnar's face shows the weight of what he's witnessed. Not shock, but the grim understanding of a warrior who recognizes a force beyond strategy or command. The saga records that Ragnar set aside his pride that day and distanced himself from Fenrir's children. This was very surprising since it was known that Ragnar had never fled from any enemy in his life. But Ragnar was a smart warrior. He had understood that Fenrir's children were dangerous not only as enemies, but to his own men as well. "After Fenrir's children," Ragnar said, "some warriors defeat their enemies, some defeat themselves, but Fenrir's children defeat war itself." But the most terrifying encounter was yet to come. The third and most terrifying group of warriors were the Einherjar Messengers. These weren't normal mortal warriors, these were sent from Valhalla, special agents of the gods. The Einherjar Messengers only appeared in very special circumstances. If a mortal became powerful enough to disrupt the gods' plans, they would intervene, and Ragnar was exactly in this situation. The special bond he had formed with the gods had made him too powerful. He had now reached a level where he was beginning to threaten Odin's plans. The Einherjar Messengers' divine mission. The Einherjar Messengers were composed of the elite among the most powerful warriors who had died in Valhalla, but they hadn't become normal Einherjar after death. They had been sent back for a special mission. The purpose of this mission, to keep Ragnar Lothbrok under control. Odin had realised that Ragnar's power had increased too much. Ragnar was no longer an ordinary mortal. His divine connection had elevated him to almost god level. In this state, he was beginning to become dangerous to Odin's Ragnarok plans. The leader of the Einherjar Messengers was the legendary Viking warrior Gunnar the Immortal. Gunnar was the only warrior who continued fighting even after death. The first divine encounter. Ragnar's encounter with the Einherjar Messengers occurred during his most powerful period. Ragnar had just won his greatest victory in England and felt almost invincible. The encounter took place on Ragnar's longship, on the open sea. Suddenly, a supernatural mist appeared around the ship. 3 figures emerged from this mist. These figures didn't resemble normal humans, they glowed translucently. Their feet didn't touch the ground, and their eyes held divine light. When Gunnar the Immortal appeared before Ragnar, he said, "Ragnar Lothbrok, you have overstepped your bounds. The gods are warning you." Divine warning and future visions. The Einherjar Messengers didn't just give Ragnar a warning, they also showed him future visions. These visions included Ragnar's future death and its consequences. In these visions, Ragnar saw his own death, the snake pit, King Ella's victory, his son's revenge. But the most horrifying part was seeing how his own divine power transformed into a curse. Gunnar said, "You gained power from the gods, but this power will destroy you, because mortals cannot carry divine power forever. This power will burn you from within." After these visions, Ragnar began to fear. He now understood that his power was not a blessing, but a curse. But Ragnar didn't surrender. He challenged the Einherjar Messengers. "If the gods fear me, kill me now." Gunnar had laughed. "We won't kill you, Ragnar, because your death is part of our plan. You cannot fight your own destiny." After this encounter, Ragnar changed. He now feared not only his enemies but also his own power. Every day he felt his divine power consuming him. The message from the Einherjar Messengers was clear. No matter how powerful you become, you cannot be more powerful than the gods. Vikings. Which of these terrifying encounters affected you most? Tell us in the comments. Was it the Shadow Tribe's psychological warfare, Fenrir's children's savagery, or the Einherjar Messengers' divine threat? Let's meet at Valhalla's gates. After these 3 terrifying encounters, Ragnar Lothbrok was no longer the same. History's bravest Viking king had begun experiencing psychological trauma. Ragnar's fears manifested in 3 categories. First, fear of losing control. The Shadow Tribe had shown him that some enemies don't follow normal rules of war. Fenrir's children had taught him how dangerous uncontrolled power could be. Second, fear of divine punishment. After the Einherjar Messenger's warning, Ragnar feared he would be punished every time he used divine power. Third, fear of fighting destiny. He now understood he couldn't change his own fate. Ragnar's changing battle strategies. These psychological changes completely altered Ragnar's battle strategies. Ragnar, who used to make direct attacks, now began to be much more cautious. He no longer entered any battle alone. He always kept trusted warriors with him. But paradoxically, he didn't fully trust anyone either. He completely abandoned night attacks, because he had learned how dangerous the Shadow Tribe was at night. The most important change was in his relationship with Berserkers. Ragnar, who used to motivate Berserkers, now stayed away from them. Fenrir's children had taught him the dangers of uncontrolled rage. Crisis in divine connection. The most dramatic change was in Ragnar's relationship with the gods. Ragnar, who used to use his divine power with confidence, now hesitated with every use. After the Einherjar Messenger's warning, Ragnar began using his divine power only in truly desperate situations. This reduced his effectiveness in battles. He began questioning his special bond with Odin. Did Odin really choose me? Or is he just using me as a tool? He began to think. This spiritual crisis was the darkest period of Ragnar's character development. Transformation from fear to wisdom. But these fears didn't completely weaken Ragnar. Actually, they made him wiser. He no longer underestimated any enemy. He began doing very detailed planning before every battle. He stopped taking risks and began making calculated moves. Thanks to this wisdom, he began suffering fewer losses. His warriors noticed this change in Ragnar and began respecting him more. Fear hadn't made Ragnar weak, it had made him more human. The ultimate realization. Finally, Ragnar understood this. True strength wasn't being fearless, but learning to live with fear. The Shadow Tribe had taught him the power of psychological warfare. Fenrir's children had shown him the dangers of uncontrolled power. The Einherjar Messengers had reminded him of divine consequences. These 3 terrifying encounters had made Ragnar the ultimate Viking warrior. He was now powerful not just in physical combat, but also on psychological, spiritual, and divine levels. But this wisdom had a price. Ragnar would never again be completely fearless. Ragnar's terrifying encounters didn't just affect himself. He also passed this wisdom and these warnings to his sons. To Ivar the Boneless he said, "You are powerful because of your strategic mind. But remember, even the smartest strategy is helpless against uncontrollable forces. To Bjorn Ironside, you're a brave warrior, but learn the difference between courage and recklessness. I learned this a bit too late. To Uber, you're powerful as a diplomat. But negotiation is impossible with some enemies. You can only stay away from them." The Great Heathen Army and Inherited Wisdom. When Ragnar's sons founded the Great Heathen Army, they applied their father's teachings. They developed psychological defenses against mysterious enemies like the Shadow Tribe. They applied strict discipline against uncontrollable warriors like Fenrir's children. Most importantly, they didn't use divine power recklessly like their father. They adopted a more calculated approach. Thanks to this approach, the Great Heathen Army was even more successful than Ragnar. The lessons learned from fear had made the next generation stronger. Protection through fear. Ragnar's fears actually protected his sons. They didn't repeat their father's mistakes. Ivar used the Shadow Tribe's psychological tactics in his own strategies. Bjorn learned from Fenrir's children's uncontrolled rage and became a disciplined warrior. Ube remembered the Einherjar Messenger's divine warnings and established a humble relationship with the gods. Ragnar's fear-filled experiences had become the foundation of his son's success. Historical impact and modern understanding. This story wasn't just a family legend. It had a deep impact on Viking culture. Other Viking leaders learned from Ragnar's experiences. They became more cautious against mysterious enemies. They understood the dangers of uncontrollable power. Modern Viking historians began to better understand Viking psychology by analysing these stories. They discovered the role of fear in Viking culture. Ragnar's final message. The words Ragnar spoke in the final periods of his life summarise the essence of Viking wisdom. I gained power from the gods, but I learned that power has a price. I feared no enemy, but I respected some forces. I began as a fearless warrior, but ended as a wise leader. My sons, remember, courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is doing what's right alongside fear. This message gave guidance to Viking leaders for generations. Archaeological research conducted today shows that Ragnar's terrifying encounters might have been real. Ancient burial sites found in Norway in 2018 yielded findings different from normal Viking burial patterns. Some graves contained mysterious symbols and unusual weapon placements. These findings support the existence of different warrior groups in Viking society. The historical reality of secretive warriors like the Shadow Tribe and ritual-based berserkers like Fenrir's children seems possible. Modern cultural impact. Ragnar's fear-filled experiences have also found echoes in modern pop culture. These themes are explored in Viking TV series, video games, and historical novels. But most importantly, this story provides lessons in modern leadership psychology. The importance of learning from fear, gaining wisdom, and humble leadership is still relevant today. Ragnar's story shows that even the greatest leaders have limits, and acknowledging these limits is not weakness but strength. If you want to be of Ragnar's bloodline, click that red subscribe rune. Join our Viking clan and discover more legendary stories. Share this story with other Vikings. Let Ragnar's legend be heard throughout the 9 realms. And remember, our next epic journey will take you deeper into the divine bloodline of the Norse kings. This story shows that power doesn't come only from human ambition. Sometimes divine forces directly intervene in the mortal world. Ragnar Lothbrok is the most complex example of this divine intervention. Fear didn't make Ragnar weak, it made him a more complete leader. And thanks to this wisdom, his sons achieved even greater accomplishments than their father.